everyone. Welcome to Mining Now. Today on the show, we have Madison Technologies, and we have their CEO, Paul Calabro, on the show. Paul, welcome to the show. Great to have you on.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, the old joke that nobody laughs at is that I get best friends for about an hour at a time, and we met a few minutes ago, and here I'm going to dig into your company. So thank you for joining us, and yeah, we're going to cover a lot of ground here. Could you just maybe a little bit about your background in the industry, and then we'll cover a little bit more about Madison Technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Spent the last 22 odd years in around commercial and industrial environments. Worked for some global organizations throughout that time with a focus around engineering and management disciplines, mainly in the built environment to begin with. So building automation and all those converged networks and systems that work in that space. Over time, moved more and more into industrial environments and critical infrastructure areas in various roles, some product management, some sales, marketing, business development strategies, and really spent a bit of time also in international product development areas for Australia and New Zealand focus. More recently, or the last 7 years, had the pleasure of being part of a fantastic Australian company focused really around our industrial environments and market sector focus in critical infrastructure.
What was of all those roles over the years and different things? What was the most challenging one for you?
You got to. For me, it would be definitely around. Product management is an area that touches so many different stakeholders.
Yeah,
and understanding how you create value in the market. So, for me, the area of product management, you get the best successes out of it when you get it right. But you got a bit of work to do in amongst all of those stakeholders.
So, what would product management? What would that sort of entail? What's sort of the role within that?
Yeah, so I got to experience two parts of that. One was really taking a finished product through to market. So it was really about routes to market and how we find the right fit with customers. So a lot of customer engagement, a lot of discussion around what sort of feature set we want to bring into that, and really how do we bring value into the marketplace. And then the other part of product management for me was really looking at how do we design the specifications, how do we design the functional requirements of a product to remain relevant against a competitive landscape. So those two, while it was all under the umbrella of product management, it was really how do we engage with customers and understand how we bring that value? And then really the other side of that is how do we design those specification elements to maintain a viable product for as long as we can in the market.
So have you been for Madison Technologies, you're using different suppliers within the industry, right?
Correct.
So there's always this balance that you're finding then, I guess, between, like you're talking about stakeholders, between the client and the systems that you're using. You're trying to sort of piece that together and make it all cohesive, right?
Correct. Yeah, the role within Madison Technologies now is very much about engaging with global manufacturers and how we take their solutions into the verticals that we serve and the customers that we can best serve. So it's product management, but not a manufacturer style of product development path. It's more taking those, I call them Lego blocks, so to speak. So how do we take those finished Lego blocks into the market and add value through the combination of more than one vendor in some cases, but equally sometimes the stack of one particular technology within a vendor's suite.
That project management, though, just because I spent some time, of course, we're going to get into Madison Technologies here. I spent some time on your website and looking at what you offer, and that project management must just be huge value to you in this role now as a CEO of Madison Technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got quite a powerful technology partner suite now that we've spent a lot of time curating. And in a lot of cases, it's also, while we want to say yes to a lot of things, it's also where we say no to things that don't align. So we're quite proud of the technology partnerships we have now to serve our customers. But in saying that, yeah, absolutely, getting the right mix of solutions that don't over compete with each other, but complement each other, is the real point where the magic happens for us. So quite important to make sure that those technology partnerships are strategically aligned, not just to the value in the market, but even amongst the ecosystem, or the war chest, as we call it, in terms of complementing each other's solutions.
Let's talk about our heavy industry tour, brought to you by Savannah Equipment, supplying mining equipment worldwide, and Geograph, solving customer challenges through innovation and design, higher performing parts, engineered solutions, on-time spare part supply, and high-quality repairs. We are heading to events across North America and Australia and filming episodes on location. Email us at info@crownsman.com to be part of Crownsman's Heavy Industry World Tour. Revolutionize your mining operations with MassPro's engineering excellence. Their engineering talent can transform your mining machinery, supercharge your productivity, and improve your equipment optimization. Your success is their mission, and they're prepared to take your mining operations to new heights by maximizing efficiency, safety, and ore extraction like never before. Head to masspro.com.au for further information. Orica Digital Solutions seamlessly connects customers' physical and digital worlds so they can readily understand and optimize operations at every step of the value chain, from exploration to processing. Whether deployed individually or as a whole, Orica Digital Solutions technologies deliver intelligence for open cut and underground mines to make more precise and faster decisions. With a complete, timely, and accurate picture, operations can adapt to improve safety, drive productivity, reduce costs, and environmental impacts. To learn more about Orica Digital Solutions, visit orica.com/digital solutions today. Okay, so let's give a special thank you to one of our longest sponsors of the show, Savannah Equipment. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Jared so that he can give you a little bit more info on Savannah Equipment.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, people see them as sponsors, so they'll ask me, kind of who they are, what they are, and just trying to understand the scope of the company. So Savannah Equipment is a mining supply company, and they're delivering on the whole equipment supply chain. So everything from the ore processing to underground mining, open pit. They're in hard rock and placer operations. And what they're doing is they're sourcing equipment from all over the world and then delivering it all over the world. Now, they are a Canadian company, so they're based there, but, let's say, they're selling entire ore processing plants. So there might be a plant down in Latin America, and there's a new mine that needs that plant in Africa or somewhere in the US. So they're facilitating that entire transactions. But they're also delivering, an individual conveyor or a concentrator or a pump package or just an electrical package. So it really is the whole gambit of the mining equipment supply chain.
Oh, that's great then. Well, then you definitely have to check them out. If you're looking for mining equipment, visit them at savannahEquipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day.
There's so much I want to get into today. I want to talk to you quite a bit about Industry 4.0 because you're right. You have a very good understanding of it for one, but also it's a topic that is discussed a lot, but I think in depth, a lot of in private, sort of 200 people at a time are having really good discussions. I'd like to have some of that discussion here on a large scale. But before we do that, I'd like to just, can you just sort of paint the picture and we spend a few minutes just who Madison Technology actually is within the market you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. No, as I mentioned, Madison Technologies is an organization that's been around for over 32 years now, serving the Australian market, Australia and New Zealand over that time. It really started life as an engineering house, working with the major telcos in this region, and really developed some of the early passive enclosures as part of the deregulation of the telco sector here in Australia. Over that time, through acquisitions, brand expansion, we created different routes to market. And ultimately, the focus now in our business is around infrastructure, critical infrastructure in industrial environments. So serving those customers that are in what we call non-carpeted space, and anything that really covers areas of resources, so mining, oil and gas, utility sector, power, water, transport sector, railroad, air, sea, and then smart cities and infrastructure. And we know those areas have got quite a lot of diversity in the way they bring projects together, but equally it gives us a nice diverse market sector focus around that. So our whole business development teams, our product teams, our marketing, our solutions teams all really become subject matter experts across the technologies that we represent. But equally, we have a basket of solutions that we can take into an end user or a systems integrator to make sure we're actually understanding the problem and how best we can help support solving that.
What does it look like? Let's say, not looking at maybe someone that you're saying no to, it's not the right setup for what you offer, but someone that, sort of that perfect kind of customer. What does the communication look like from day one? So you get an email and they need to come. Are you coming on site looking at projects? Are they sending you, is there certain information? What is sort of let's say the first 2 weeks to a month of communication look like?
Yeah.
What are the steps that need to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts to our business. One, being an organization that's spent the last 30 odd years in the market here, there's a bit of inbound traffic. So that's a lot of transactional style of our business, and we value that. And that's important to our technology partners to ensure that we have a level of growth in the install base around what we call maintain, repair, operate. When we go into solution world, we're very conscious of, we have two sort of customers that we really look to service and support. Our primary bucket is our end users, and that's end user organizations around those primary vertical focuses that I mentioned. And then we have a group of fantastic partners known as systems integrators, and they really pull together solutions that will offer to end users from not just Madison Technologies, but could be a wider portfolio. So our engagement really, when we look at those two style of customers, could be a request to really get involved in discovery workshops. So they may have a particular problem. They're looking for us to see if we can have some of that technology that can solve that. We'll run deep dive workshops. We'll run subject matter experts who will go in and talk specifically about our technologies that we're representing. Or equally, we may partner with a systems integrator to go in and have a listen to what that problem is and see where we have the complementary skill sets and where it may be best to partner together. Those ultimately result in proposals, solutions that we'll pull together based on either architectures, and we'll talk a bit more about the technologies that we focus on. We'll pull those together, put some indicative budgets together. But the key in that is really engaging with what is that problem to be solved. And that's something that gets mentioned quite a lot in organizations, but to actually try to hold your ground and not just talk about price and orders is really a big difference within Madison. We understand that our role is to bring sustained value to those customers, not just short-term fixes. So while we have that great transactional part of our business, which we love and value, it's really how do we bring value beyond the box? How do we bring that value into the insight? And this area of challenge is evolving. We've got all sorts of challenges customers of ours are facing in efficiencies, in cybersecurity areas, in data privacy, in resilient communications. So those are the areas that we have a lot of knowledge over many years, a lot of great global partnerships, and we really bring that expertise, as I mentioned, beyond the box to try to understand how we really solve that customer's problem.
Hey, mining enthusiasts! Registration for CIM Connect 2024 Vancouver from May 12th to 15th is now open. Last year, this convention had over 6,800 participants from 60 countries, with 1,796 delegates, 702 booths, and 320 presentations. Secure your spot and register now at convention.cim.org. CIM Connect 2024, where quality and innovation define the experience. With Fender Dunlop, you know you are getting the best conveyor belting in the market. That's because they ensure the integrity of their conveyor belting by monitoring each step of the manufacturing process in their North American facilities. Focused attention is given to each belting order to guarantee that they produce a belt that will assist the customer in reducing operation costs, maximizing uptime, and improving revenue. Visit FenderDunlopAmericas.com to learn more. Bentek Group is an industry leader when it comes to design, engineering, and manufacturing. Bentek specializes in engineered safety and efficiency equipment such as access platforms, heavy-duty workbenches, work stands and trestles, material and equipment storage, and a range of lifting and handling solutions to maximize safety for your personnel. But that's not their only area of expertise. Bentek also supply high-performance OEM replacement parts for mobile equipment. Bentek's rocks mining parts are built better, eliminating downtime and maximizing efficiency. Visit bentekgroup.com.au today to explore their range.
Well, you talk, and we are going to start. I want to look at your specific verticals. I would like to look at a couple, like examples of you delivering the service as well. It's always helpful to sort of make it real world. But before we do that, I did want to go into digital transformation 4.0. They're such big topics, and there are people that really do understand it. But there's other people. It's just me being one of them. Sometimes it's like I get it, and then it's like I'm almost, as the conversation moves on, it starts to like go away from me. I'm like, I don't know if I'm quite with what's happening anymore.
Yeah.
So what does 4.0 mean in layman's terms? What does 4.0 mean when you hear it?
Yeah. No, we love this conversation because for us, an organization that can be part of a story that's transforming industry is very special, rather than just talking more about product and problem. So for us, this landscape of Industry 4.0 is really an evolution of previous generations of that. So what I mean by that is when we had Industry 3.0, that was heavily around centralized control systems. Again, in industrial environments, it was really much about grab data from the edge, bring it back, make a decision, and then push decision making out. Industry 4.0 is changing that landscape. And for us, we have very different levels of conversation with our customers about where they're at in that preparedness for digital transformation. So Industry 4.0 for us and the alignment to our technologies is fantastic, is perfect. Where Industry 4.0 plays a lot of strength is now we start seeing more decentralized controls. So we start seeing more and more assets at the edge, having the ability to have insights, gaining insights and intelligence of what's happening at those extreme edges, and really making decisions at that point as well, not having to send everything back to a centralized location to make those decisions and make those calculations. So Industry 4.0 for us is a plethora of areas of focus, connectivity being one of those, machine learning being another, cybersecurity, the expansion of the Internet of Things and sensors and what's that doing to radically transform what would previously be a lot of labor-intensive maintenance or inspection, and all that in between. Now, from our experience, this is not at a maturity point yet. No one has got the entire Industry 4.0 story completely solved. And we're firm believers that this is going to take more than one manufacturer or more than one party. It's an ecosystem of partners working together to really help those end users with how we're going to build out the Industry 4.0 story over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And within that, we've got emerging verticals. So renewable sector, as we know here in our region, is gaining more and more momentum. How does that translate with more decentralized assets and monitoring and getting those insights back in? So for us, it's always nice to have a great technology partnership with the global vendors we represent and our local vendors we represent. Having a narrative that's part of a industry movement is fantastic.
When you say more decentralization, could you just give me an example of that? Like I've done things about, monitoring like assets and things like that. So I have some, I would an example of decentralization being that the person running the machine actually gets a notification of what they should do. It's also going back to the main brain, but they're able to also make decisions. Is that an example, or would there be a better example of something that's sort of that you're saying? I think you said the term working on the edge.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's two examples. That's a great question. So we have two areas really, monitoring and control. A lot of what we're doing at the edge in our first phase of this is a lot more monitoring based application. So an example of that will be we've got some end users in the rail sector who have kilometers of infrastructure of rail lines, mainly for freight management, not consumer market. In those environments, temperature plays a significant role in how optimized you can run the freight lines and the cargo containers across that infrastructure. If the rail lines get too hot, the carts can decouple and cause major issues of outages and just getting things back online. Mm-hmm. So there would be traditionally no way of easily monitoring that through outside of inspections and maybe some sensors, but getting that data back and then making decisions would be quite costly. You have to manage the network. You've got to have permanent power to run that across kilometres and kilometres of rail infrastructure. So for us, when we talk about decentralized control and monitoring, one area we're having a lot of progress with is working with these rails operators, putting IoT sensors every so many meters, I think about 500 meters to a kilometer along the rail line. And that'll just keep monitoring the temperature of that rail line. As we set parameters as to early indication, we can give early alerts that can be reported back to say, hey, there's something here that you may want to be aware of. In that case, then the operators can either slow down the rail carts, or they can choose to see if there's an alternative path or manage more accordingly. So that's an example of not so much reactive-based decision-making, but more preventative, turning into proactive in a monitoring environment.
So that would be an example. So that would go to the actual operator of the train.
Correct. So the operators will make those decisions based on, are we going to slow down our cargo lines? Are we going to see if there's an alternative route? Is it better to hold back for a certain amount of time and then continue on? We're not ready yet through machine learning to make those automated decisions, but there's no doubt about it. As we get better insights into what's happening in those extreme environments, machine learning can play a part and likely will play a part. But in critical infrastructure environments, you're still very much having a human element be part of the final decision-making process. That
final decision. And what you're saying is, so when they say 4.0, are they including, I don't know who they is, but does it include that autonomy or the autonomous systems as well, to eventually integrate in so that train automatically knows, okay, well, no, we don't go down this route. We got to find a new route. This is the new route, all that.
Yeah. So again, this is where different market verticals in our region are progressing at different rates. In mining, we've got examples of connectivity, what we call nodes on autonomous trucks that are already self-regulating how they're controlling speed, GPS. They're already in that space, but a lot of learning has gone on. So in that sector for us, the maturity of, I guess, call it automated management is much more progressed. In the rail sector, which is for us been traditionally pretty slow to move, they're now starting to become much more aware of not so much controlling yet, but how do we start getting those environmental insights to make decisions that ultimately, once there's enough data collated and we can work out how we should behave in these scenarios, we probably will see more machine learning control how that freight line is going to move its cargo from A to B. So yeah, very great question. In some market sectors, we see quite a great progress around autonomous and machine learning. In others, it's still a very much an emerging landscape. But it's all part of that industry 4.0.
It's all in the umbrella. How hard is it to integrate? Like, I remember when we first started, everybody talked like mining was way behind, and now, I mean, I do shows across different sectors, construction and energy and agriculture, and it's pretty hard for me to think that mining is behind. It's caught up real quick in a lot of ways. There's always more work to do, but for companies to do that in the way that mining has over the last several years, and I know it's been a long time coming. What does it take to integrate? Is that? I mean, are you seeing companies taking? Is it 5 years? Can they do it in a year if they're fully committed? I mean, what does it actually take to get to that level?
Yeah, the integration topic is one that's always how much the risk appetite is there when we start talking integration. And what I mean by that is integration is great when it works. When it doesn't work, who is accountable? Where do we go for trying to resolve the problem? So what we're finding is, and mining's a great example, we're finding across our technology pillars some really strong uptake in, for example, wireless mesh. So technology wireless mesh solutions that ultimately will never create a break in its network. So the enhancement of putting what we call breadcrumbs or nodes onto assets that are distributed across the mine site will create a fail-safe network that will never have a single point of failure. So that's moving quite rapidly. And why is that beneficial? OH&S, having people on sites and having the ability to communicate back, that's making quite strong leaps and bounds. In other technologies in mining, using cameras as sensors to mainly not so much always look at production, although that is a big part of what goes on with our cameras technology, but equally environmental monitoring. So what's happening with thermal gas within a gas pipeline? So what's happening to the thermal signature within a gas pipeline? Using cameras in ways that aren't traditional security surveillance of people, but more about the environment and the assets themselves. That's making more progress. But that's using the connectivity layer to help drive that information back. Cameras now becoming much more sophisticated, much more intelligent at the edge, so they can make some decisions and rule out some data that they don't need to transmit back, but only based on particular requirements can send that information back or make decisions at the edge around, do I want to collate this? Do I want to let it go? Should I give someone an indication of that? So cameras are being used in different applications, especially in mining. Our IoT solutions in mining, with the use of drones around making good the vegetation. So as some of the miners here in Australia are digging up the landscape, they've also got a responsibility to make good the vegetation. So using drones to reseed parts of that area that for vegetation and so on. So again, connectivity layer with cameras, but IoT moving across that environment. So we're finding, depending on the maturity of the digital roadmap in these customers and these end users, how real the risk appetite is and whether they're willing to innovate in a way that helps drive either productivity improvements, safety improvements, or environmental and social improvements. That's where you see the integration levels either really step up or take incremental steps still within their own technology. So, for example, that connectivity layer, maybe that's expanding within its own technology, but not so much the integration across cameras and IoT. So
it's quite we probably need about 5 more episodes to really dig into it. So I'll try not to go too deep. The one thing that I was wondering, though, that just from your experience, and feedback from your team who are, out in the field and talking to people, I actually just recently watched somebody onboard basically like a sales system for a large organization, and watching what it took with all the stakeholders and that it really, I don't think I appreciated how much an individual affected the onboarding of a system. I mean, I knew it in theory, but I got to see it sort of firsthand to go, oh, if there was a different person with a slightly different approach, this could be a complete disaster. 400-person organization, everybody connected, all these different data points and people needing different data at different times. And it's just, the information supply chain, it's just this crazy thing that I would have done a horrible job at, for the record. But so I watched it. How much of that does play into 4.0? And I don't know if I'm asking the question very well, but it's at a mine site or, a rail company or whoever it is, how important is it just to that head person at the company to have a good understanding of not just the technology, but the methodology behind onboarding?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And for us, again, in our part of the world, very different experiences. And so we have had discussions with end users, sometimes with our systems integration partners, sometimes with our vendor partners. And what does that roadmap look like? What does that roadmap look like towards integration or convergence of the IT environment, the traditional carpeted space, more and more being influential or decision-making into the OT space or the operational technology space? Traditionally, there's been a lot of air gap for obvious reasons. Productivity is the ultimate system you want to keep up online and available at all times. IT's normally been segregated from that. So we got a very, very interesting dynamic going on, and it really comes down to who's driving the digital strategy in those clients. if we end up in conversations where there's an IT OT convergence story, we know very quickly that there'll be points of confusion around who owns the problem at this point.
Yeah.
Whole IT may own the enterprise infrastructure that the OT system may have to talk to. Who's actually responsible for the cable that connects that through? And a lot of the time we find just absolute confusion. And those scenarios aren't really tested until something critically breaks, and then it's all hands on deck. So for us, integration is a great utopia, and there are pockets of integration that have gone really well. But I think for us, really, this first phase, as I see it and our team see it, is as part of Industry 4.0, is what can we do within the systems themselves, as in what can we be doing within IoT to bring better insights? What can we be doing at the connectivity layer to make it more resilient? What can we be doing with cameras to make it more valuable to see those insights at the edge rather than having to truck roll? So they're not necessarily integrating those systems completely yet, but they're more saying, how do we bring the technology into the landscape as a first phase? And as that's becoming more and more embedded, and the insights we gain from that, then we may start talking more integration options. But you're 100% right. Who's driving that strategy? You know, the CTOs over here, the CIOs, very, very different. If there's an IT slant, that can become quite interesting. We have all sorts of narratives. There's CTOs that don't want to see the OT environments part of the IT environments. There's those that want to see convergence for efficiencies and so on. I think it's very real around how is the risk matrix being played out. Is again, integration is when everything works great. When it doesn't, who's accountable? How do we get that problem solved as soon as possible?
Yeah, when you said about who's responsible for that cable, it sometimes it comes down to things that simple. It's just who was supposed to put that there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and, you know, in the IT space, you lose an email server, it's disruptive. But in OT environments, you lose critical comms in a production line. There could be all sorts of risks, obviously financial, productivity, getting machines up and running again, but then safety, health and safety. So it's integration is one that's going at the pace it needs to, based on the appetite of the organization.
Yeah, and then never mind just people's communication style. You have
Correct.
You know, IT, like you were saying about a CTO wanting to operate OT with IT.
Correct.
Some want to keep them separate. So you've got these like different methodologies. Sometimes I think people may not even be aware that they have a methodology. They just
Absolutely.
have the way they look at it. What it would be? I've obviously touched on it, but just to sort of clarify, what would be like if you had like let's say 5 verticals, what would they actually be for Madison Technologies?
Yeah. So we've got the 5 verticals and the technologies that we map into that. So mentioned previously, our primary vertical focuses are around resources, so mining, oil and gas environments. We have our utilities, water, power, distributed assets. Ultimately, we've got our transport sector, so that's rail, road, air, sea. And then we've got our cities and infrastructure, which is bridges, tunnels, councils, all those sort of areas around monitoring or controlling those environments. That's our focus primarily. We do have secondary market verticals, but they're our primary, and that's where critical infrastructure really plays an important part on ensuring resilience, uptime, availability, security. The technology solutions we have that map into all of those verticals are really the top 5. So we talked a bit about connectivity. That's been Madison's history for the last 30 plus years. We're known for our connectivity solutions, whether that be passive, active equipment, but in terms of industrial ruggedized solutions. So our connectivity technology solution is our core. Then we have some really nice complements to that, having that foundation of connectivity inside a customer's environment. We talked about cameras. So we have a term called camera as a sensor, or AIoT. And that's really about how we're using cameras in those non-traditional environments of non-security, non-surveillance, but monitoring people, assets, the environment. So we're using cameras in examples to look at, again, rocks falling on a rail line, to see in some of our customers, again, that rail sector is quite strong. How we're using cameras to detect rock formation, rock falling, and make some indicative indications of those insights to control, not to change the working environment, but to give that insight to the operators to determine, hey, do we need to send someone out? Is there going to be an issue here? So cameras are being used in that environment. So we have our connectivity, our camera as a sensor. We have edge compute. So again, as part of Industry 4.0, decentralized monitoring and control. Edge compute really brings the power of processing right at the edge. So we know how much data is being generated on this planet we're all on. We don't need to always send that information back to a centralized location to make a decision. Sometimes at the edge, you can make some pretty basic without being too controlling decisions at that edge environment. So our edge compute story is really about processing power, again, working with cameras, working with resilient comms to drive those decisions there. Our fourth pillar is really around cybersecurity, and what are we doing around cybersecurity just generally in terms of the infrastructure that we have. In Australia, there's a lot of work now focused by federal government around improving the Critical Infrastructure Act. There's sites of national significance that have been increased around how do we make sure that not just a reactive cybersecurity assessment, but very preventative and proactive. How are we monitoring that in those situations? The cable that may not be clear. Who's ultimately accountable for those sort of things in the cyberspace? And our fifth pillar is really around IoT, or the expansion of the industrial Internet of Things. In that environment, it's high volume, low cost, really battery operated solutions across two main network styles, LoRa and narrowband IoT. And it's really about how do we get those insights that are more cost effective than, again, truck rolling people out and maybe hazardous, may not be easily accessible. IoT provides a nice solution for us to go in and provide those insights, again, at the edge, not always in a control plane, but are definitely in a monitoring and reporting back style of engagement.
So you're really combining hardware and software, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So as the industry changes so much, I'll give my poor example, and then you can clarify stuff. Right now I'm sitting here, I'm using analog system as opposed to a digital system, but that's running into an analog system, which then converts to the digital system for our audio. Then we're running digital cameras that are running into a digital system. So we've got this mixture of analog, digital, and an actual film, as opposed to then being put through like a software, which is our production. So it's this mixture of things. Now, there's some people that will come on and do like a show, and they'll maybe use a camera, like just a phone or something like that. They can't, if you're looking to get at a certain level, you actually can't use those devices to get a certain level of production. You can get it close, but you can't quite get there. That's a long-winded way of asking. The best way I know how is, how do you piece all of this together in a way that it is delivering, but it's still like our system has changed over the years. We're always adding in a new piece, another adapter, another software. It's always evolving. How do you sort of approach that when you're coming, let's say that rail company, okay, but now maybe in 5 years they're going to need something new.
Yes.
Are systems getting designed now in a way that growth is in mind, or do you have to re-hardware it? I mean, again, I'm stumbling over this question because to me it's a complicated thing.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah, if you know what I mean, just sort of that.
I do.
Yeah.
We, from our perspective and our experience here, the technology disruption is the fastest I've ever seen in my time around this space. The ability to previously spin up POCs or proof of concepts would take a lot more time, a lot more understanding of how we're trying to solve this. That still goes on, but now the technology, for example, IoT, spinning up a proof of concept to run a rail line temperature monitoring solution is not that complicated, where you don't have to look at where am I getting power from, where am I getting comms from, how am I going to install this. Those technology disruptions really now become enablers to moving at a pace that we've never moved at before. So we are moving at the fastest and slowest pace in the history of our adoption of technology. And what I mean by that is this will be continually evolving. There, use cases that we get presented with. We haven't thought of those examples before, but customers are really driving in. How do we solve this problem? And then we look at how we best play that out. So, to your point, there are very quick ways to spin up a video interview like this, and using a camera phone is one of those. In industrial environments, it becomes more about how resilient is that, how ruggedized is that, how secure is that? Now, in POC, may be willing to trade those elements off to test out the use case. But once we move beyond that, it becomes very much about these environments need to hold themselves on the hardware side for at least 15, 20 plus years.
Right.
So we definitely know at the hardware layer, the sensors we select, the switch ranges, the cellular modems, the Wi-Fi units, always highly ruggedized, always required. Where it becomes agile, I guess to your point, is how do we then take that insight, that information, and into software layer and start making more intelligent decisions or insights from it. The challenge with IoT, as we see it, is the amount of data points it will collect for the value of, you only need one piece of information really out of that insight, or all those data points, to make the decision or make a calculation, but it's grabbing so much information. So with the software layer now, it's how we mining that information, not through humans looking through trails of log files, but how are we making that more user friendly. Now that is the challenge for us in the OT space.
That's challenge.
Where that is the challenge, absolutely. In the consumer space, we're seeing chatbots and all sorts of evolutions go on, language learning models and ChatGPTs and Bard and so on, providing quite interesting insights. But in OT environments, that's going to take still a lot more time. It'll get there, is our view, but given the consequences of it not working, I don't think any organization would be prepared to take the risk in that. So I think, to sum that up, which is a great question, the hardware layer will be more and more disrupted through low costs and abilities to spin up POCs. It's really, how do we take that information once we've got it, and what do we do with it? So the rail monitoring solution, how do we take that information of all those temperature data points? How do we use it in a way that becomes supportive, not a distraction to trying to make a decision? That'll be a challenge.
But that hardware system for that rail example that you used, that doesn't become outdated in 2 or 3 years. It's the technology going into it that will evolve.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a great answer. Because it's one of these it's one of these things that I do think it confuses people. Like, that separation of the hardware and the software is still, for a lot of people, a very confusing. I've done interviews, and halfway through the interviews, I'm like, I can't. I'm like, do you do hardware? Or is this all, are we just completely discussing software? Because they dip in and out. The pure software companies, they will talk, when they talk about integration, it almost sounds like they're actually out there putting in the hardware. And then halfway through, I realize, oh, you don't do the hardware part. You're relying on someone else's hardware, and now you come in and put your software in. And I mean, I'm confused, and I do it for a living. For a living.
Absolutely. No, it's similar stories and conversations from our side. And I think there will be a level of stabilization that happens here. There is definitely a lot of activity around platforms and IoT platforms, device management platforms, analytic platforms. You look at the hyperscalers and what they're doing around Azure and Amazon and so on. So there will be a level of stabilization that occurs. Our challenge is going to be how do we get to that point in a way that that isn't confusing? And so when we talk to customers, the hardware is just the thing that gets locked away. The rail line, it's just a sensor sitting out in the field. It has to be ruggedized, it has to take extreme heat. But the real insight the customer's looking for is, when do I need to make a decision on whether I slow down my cargo freight line, whether I stop it altogether? Is there another way of me to get that's what they're looking for, those insights, which is obviously at the software layer. But how they do that, the single pane of glass conversation comes up pretty often. How do I get the insights I want in a single pane of glass? I don't want to be bombarded with 1,000 emails on alerts or messages. That is going to be the challenge in as we go out and do more of this deployment of technology as part of Industry 4.0.
Something like that rail system, and maybe if there's another example that stands out, it'd be nice to do another sort of real world scenario. But at that rail system, how long would a system like that, I mean, you don't have to speak to that one specifically if you don't like, but if all goes well, what would from initial conversation to full deployment, not counting any sort of upgrades over the years and stuff, but just operational deployment, what would a system like that take to put in?
Duration wise?
Yeah, from initial contact to, okay, the client is using the data.
Yeah. So for us, these conversations to what we talked about earlier around solution orientated problems to be solved, we'll start those with a POC or proof of concept. That will normally take about 3 months, depending on the client, but we'll normally run a POC for about 3 months once it's installed. We'll either work with their local installers to support that installation based on safety requirements, compliance requirements, or we'll work with systems integrators to help deploy that in. POCs are a great way, but to get some level of insight as to what's happening. The challenge with POCs is it's not always considered what a next step looks like. So we always try to understand, as we do a POC, are you clear on what your next step looks like? Are you clear on what the success measures mean for your team or your organization? Do you understand where the budget's going to come from beyond POC? Because is it a CapEx? Is it an OpEx style of discussion? So we've seen, not just in Madison, but generally POCs are great. Oh, let's run one up, and then there's no next step after that because they're not clear. So we'll try to understand that as we go through and map out a POC, but they're great. They'll spin that up. So it's normally about a 3-month program. We'll run a bit of proactive monitoring on that. We'll work with the client to make sure they're understanding that their assets are online and what the data is telling them. Beyond POC, then, really there's 2 parts here. If it's an existing infrastructure like a rail line, which is what we call brownfield, that duration of project rollout can be anywhere from several months to years. And IoT is still very new for us. So we've got a client at the moment, again in this rail sector, where we're now deploying those sensors across their existing rail line. But that will go on from indications for the next 2 or 3 years as part of OpEx budgets, where they would used to previously have to send people out. They can now get those insights from the IoT devices. So it's where the money is getting shifted from. If it's greenfield or new build, that could be, depending on the project timing, that'll be a hard finish for us, which is great. But then obviously you won't get the ongoing opportunities for continued condition monitoring out of that. So for us, 3 months POCs, then it becomes is it brownfield, greenfield? Brownfield can go on for years, especially around IoT-based solutions. Greenfield will have a pretty clear, probably 18 to 24-month build cycle, again, depending the asset and infrastructure, but we're normally working on those timelines. In cameras, quite interesting. Again, a POC. So cameras in our solution are really about use cases of early smoke detection, thermal image recognition, license plate recognition. Some of those are more mature than others, so POCs aren't always needed. And again, depending if it's a legacy site where they want to get some more insights, that can just be part of a OpEx rollout. If they go for CapEx funding, as in the client goes for CapEx funding, then it really becomes about what is the delivery time frame around that. So Industry 4.0 for us has quite an interesting horizon. There's plenty of opportunity for us in the brownfield space with the technologies we represent, which is reassuring for us, because Australia is going through quite an interesting change at the moment. But the infrastructure spends we had over the last couple of years aren't there today. The budgets at a federal level are being re-looked at. There's some infrastructure projects that have been cut completely. So for us, it's not just waiting for greenfield sites to come online, but equally how are we supporting brownfield sites and those technology solutions we have across the 5 areas, adding more value. And for us, Rich, it's really about how do we remain relevant with all of that? How do we, as an organization, as a team, make sure we remain relevant and remain valued in the marketplace, as every organization should be asking themselves?
Yeah, it's Yeah, I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of those conversations as your team is developing. You mentioned cameras, so I have a quick question about the camera. Is that an example too? You mentioned like I think you mentioned two different types of detection. I think gas, heat, maybe.
And early smoke detection.
Early smoke detection, and then you mentioned a license plate. So there's an example. If let's say someone did all those other ones, and then let's say a new security person came in and said, "Hey, we should be monitoring this." Does that hardware is that a software that can be added to a camera that someone purchased 3 years ago?
Great question. The cameras now, we're working with some great global partners for one more recent, one very long term. The cameras now are quite modular. So the challenge in that is it's not always needing to be a complete hardware retrofit. A lot of this time it's around the sensor. So license plate has to have a very specific style of lens that goes in.
Right.
A lot of that now can be versus, if you're doing gas detection, or which is very customized, thermal is a very specific style of camera that gets used and needs to be approved for installation. But a lot of the time now, the sensor technology is already embedded in the camera itself, and it's about turning on certain feature sets. So we live in a world now, as we're talking about, the world's sort of being consumed by software. So as a result of that, the features in the hardware are already in place, but enabling them becomes a case of, well, what's the use case you want to use that for?
Right.
Those examples I gave would likely require a particular sensor change based on the accuracy of information and the ramification of if it's wrong, what would happen. But generally speaking, in other use cases, the hardware is already sitting inside the product, and through software we'll have an app that's created. Either we'll create it or work with an existing app solution, and then allow those to be used.
It's amazing times, and I mean, we of course there's so much we could go talk about. But I wanted just on the camera side, are there any examples? Again, if we can, I'd like to make real world like sort of scenarios. Are there any examples that sort of stand out to sort of walk the audience through to say this is where a camera would operate in some of these operations that you service?
Yeah. So we have a couple of great examples. So in the mining or resources sector, we have a client who approached us about a situation on a mine site where, while they had cameras monitoring their productivity, they had cameras monitoring their drag lines and all those assets that needed to be monitored. They had one of their trucks that was moving across the site, and these trucks, as you have seen probably and imagine, are quite substantial. The driver didn't notice what was around them, was a bit of a blind spot, and there was a fatality on site, which was pretty was devastating. So the ask of us was to see if we could come up with a solution where cameras could be not just deployed to watch the mining operation, but actually deployed around the truck. So could we create eyes for the driver that could be put at different points around the truck? So as they're moving, they've always got a real-time feed as to who may be around it. So our team looked at the use case, looked at the working environment, understood what were we trying to look at? Was it people? Was it environment, assets? And we came up with a solution that really gave them 8 cameras on the outside of this this loading truck, that the driver and also the feed would go back to control room to ensure that as they were moving around, there would be early indication. We could pick up object detection of, was it a particular person, another asset, and give them early indication of just being aware. Again, that reactive to preventive style of engagement. So
these are these are sensory cameras then. These are not just right.
Or cameras being used as sensors,
right?
Absolutely. So that was looking at who was around, what assets were around it, what other equipment was around the truck as it was moving. So rather than just look at people movement, it was looking at how do I provide insight into the environment around the operating truck. Now, the complexity of that was, how do we mount these cameras that are traditionally sitting? Normally, cameras sit on a pole in a fixed location. While this was fixed on the truck, it was, how do we ensure vibration testing had to be considered, temperature rise based on the operating level of the machine, that had to be considered. So it was quite a unique use case, but our team came together. We now providing that as a pretty standard solution for not just Australia, but the customer also has offices and facilities in South Africa.
Oh wow. And what about the what about things you said about like fire, smoke detection and that? Are those sort of easy installs for you, or are there some pretty complex systems that go into place for things like that?
Not not so much complex. The complexity comes from more about understanding what the use case is and what you're trying to get out of that. So what I mean by that is with the smoke detection example, you don't want too many false positives. So you don't want a situation where the camera's alerting situation. So in that case, it was fertilizer storage. There was concern about what was happening within the environment. They obviously didn't want to raise any alarms if there wasn't a need for that. But smoke and around that environment needed to have a level of monitoring. But they didn't want to just put a smoke detector in. They wanted to have eyes in there as well to see what was going on across the environment. So for us, the smoke solution is not a complex thing. There's some pre-built apps that we can put in. But again, it's more than just how do we take the camera beyond just being the traditional eyes? How do we actually start looking at what else is going on in that environment and providing, again, those preventative, predictive insights? So again, we're not at a point where machine learning is going to make those decisions yet, but giving those early insights in a way that, again, doesn't overload the operator. But the alternative to that is a reactive-based solution where a smoke indication could turn into a fire. It becomes pretty catastrophic. So that particular client is on board with a POC for us at the moment. All indications are it's working quite well. And so that will roll out across their warehouse facilities, all things going well. And again, that would be an OpEx, an OpEx readjustment for them. They've got some ways they monitor at the moment, quite inefficient and expensive ways. Cameras and that sort of camera with a connectivity layer can start providing those insights to them much more efficiently.
Is this like I was reading through, I had a couple case studies sent. I saw one that was saying about, I think this is specific to Australia, 450 fires had been related to lithium batteries from 2001 to 2023. I mean, that's a new problem, I would think.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got batteries all through our neighborhoods now in all sorts of areas. So, yeah.
So is that
absolutely
another part of your industry now is just monitoring even things like that at waste facilities and those types of things then?
Correct. I mean, a waste facility is a great example. So you've got the concern on how batteries are now being moved across residential environments, and you get those sort of stats. While the timeline is quite long, that's still quite a high number. But even cameras being used for license plate recognition on littering around waste facilities or dumping or speeding, where we have a temporary camera solution that can be spun up by council, easily deployed in areas of high speed. High speed areas that you don't need to have permanent infrastructure. So cameras, and we're seeing it here. You're probably seeing it where you are. Cameras are being used in all sorts of ways that aren't just about people or security surveillance in traditional ways. The environment monitoring is a massive area for growth. So our focus is to not try to be everything in this space. It can get quite difficult to productize or commercialize these use cases, but we focus around 5 or 6 particular use cases that are the most obvious, scalable, repeatable, without huge amounts of complexity, but provide that level of insight to those end users that we talked about in those verticals.
Before we sort of wrap up this interview, I'd like to sort of switch up the topic a little bit and just talk about your leadership, building teams, and I think I'll kick it off with you talked about product management. We talked a little bit about that being a part or helping in this role here now. Throughout this role that you've had now, what do you think has been, what do you think was the biggest asset you brought in with your leadership style, your knowledge base, whatever that is to you? What stood out, and what's been the biggest challenge over the years now in this role that you have?
my experience, and I've been fortunate to lead some fantastic businesses with some fantastic people, and Madison is definitely one of those organizations that I hold very close to that statement. Having that engineering background and just that inquisitive mindset combined with some of the management experience in very different roles, as we spoke about, it really gave me appreciation to understand that building a great team around you that can complement areas where you may not be as strong, where others are, is one of the most important assets. We run a bit of a mantra in our team. We win or learn. We don't see failure as necessarily a negative viewpoint. What we do encourage our team is to continually try and innovate, try to find better ways of doing things. So I talked before about bringing value beyond the box. For our team, we're obviously a technology-based organization, but we've got some great people in our marketing teams, our operations teams and customer care teams, obviously our product management teams. So it's not always about being passionate about the technology. For me, it's very much about being passionate about your craft. And as long as you see yourself constantly trying to improve and giving it your best effort, we can't ask for much more than that. So our win or learn mantra is serving us quite well. And we say that by putting customers at the center of what we do. So what we try to do with that mindset is ensure that as we're bringing on these new technologies, as we're bringing on new partnerships focused on those verticals, we've got to maintain that focus on customer at the center of what we do. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with that. They become a bit more inward facing, become a bit more critical of themselves, forgetting that, customers are what keep us all here and keep us moving forward. So for me, it's been a lot about that, win or learn, and putting customers at the center of what we do.
Well, that's why I tell people when they're talking about starting their own podcast as an internal company, I always say, and I try, sometimes I get listened to, sometimes not, but I always say, oh yeah, do your own show. Just bring other guests on. Just don't sit there and talk about yourself. Because after about 5 episodes, you'll find the conversation gets a little lame.
Absolutely.
To say the least.
Absolutely.
It'd be like us doing a show about doing podcasts would not be a very interesting show. But you said something that kind of stood out is to me was, and I'll try to paraphrase it to see if I understood it right. If you have someone in your team that's, let's say, passionate about marketing, you're looking for someone who's passionate about that, not necessarily that they're passionate about your technology and what your company delivers, but the role that they're doing. They're passionate about that skill set. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah. So
it's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, obviously we have a value proposition that's bringing technology to critical infrastructure environments, to the markets that we can best serve and the customers we can best serve that with. For us, when we go looking at building a high-performing team, we want to have people that are passionate about their craft. If they love technology, that's absolutely what we want them to do as well. But what we see happen here is when someone's really passionate about the work they do, we all have our good days and our not so good days. When they're passionate about the work they do, that's infectious. That just lifts the energy level of all those around them. And it's testament to the team that we've built around us in Madison Technologies. We're doing things differently to where we were 3 months ago, 6 months ago, not because what we were doing was broken at all, but because our team have a very are given empowerment to look at how we line up their activity to our vision and our focus. So, this today is something that we've been talking about for a little while. How do we create more value in the market? How do we create those insights? Coming together and working out how do we bring that passion through those disciplines into the marketplace is highly valuable. And so for our team, they're empowered to go and do their best. Win or learn for me is a mantra, because if we're not trying, we won't remain relevant. We won't remain valued. And that's where a lot of businesses that we've seen go down. So we continually innovate. We'll try to find ways to disruptively innovate. That can be an uncomfortable space. It can be quite foggy sometimes. But as long as we're continuing with that mindset, I'm a firm believer that those people that are passionate and curious will continue to enjoy the ride with us.
Well, the reason it stuck out to me so much, because I'm thinking, for our own company, I go, that's an interesting way to look at it, because let's say I'll use it in marketing. I have a bit of a marketing background, so it's an easy one for me. Is if I'm passionate about that, it doesn't really matter what type of company I'm with. And what it will do is if the priority is first you're bringing in people that are passionate about what your company does, you you kind of run the risk of having because maybe a certain type of person is passionate about that. So you end up with a little bit of a bubble type mentality in the company, as opposed to somebody they're all about marketing. So they're bringing you 10
Correct.
different strategies. Now it's up to you as a leader to sift through those to say, okay, those line up with our values, our vision. And as long as you know that vision, then it won't end up being convoluted. You can kind of get the right things, but that person is bringing those things to you. I'm making a lot of assumptions that that's how it is.
No.
But it seems like
there was a relevant conversation only 24 hours ago on this topic. We're going through some recruitment now, and it's there's certain roles obviously that need to have the subject matter expertise on the technology, but in a lot of our areas, it's also about the subject matter expertise in the craft that they've got, and how do we best leverage that into the organization. And it's a two-way street for us. Our team have got to find value that they're fulfilling their passions and their purpose with it. If they can do it with Madison Technologies, and trailblaze a bit, we're all for that. So we encourage that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. That's one of these things that's going to roll around my head for a while, because it's actually a quite interesting strategy. Yeah, Paul, thank you for coming on the show. I hope this is one of those interviews. I hope I did your company justice. I hope I did Madison Technologies because Madison Technologies. You've got so much information. I know we didn't cover everything, but I hope I gave at least some snapshot of it, or gave you the opportunity to do it, because it's some really great stuff you're doing.
No, it was appreciate the discussion and the opportunity. No, a great time with you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And thank you, everybody, for watching. We will put links to Madison Technologies, and to even Paul's LinkedIn. It's all going to be in the description below. It's probably popped up on the screen throughout this episode as well. But just make sure to go click follow, check them out, and just see some of what they're doing. They've got a very nice website. They've got a good YouTube channel. We'll put a link to that as well, so you can check out more, just to deepen your understanding of who they are. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to sponsors and people that organize the show and film the show. It makes it a ton of fun. And thank you mostly, of course, to the audience that keeps watching and keeps sharing out our stuff, so that it keeps growing. Thank you, and we will see you on the next episode of Mining Now.